All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk to you guys about a topic I think has not really been covered by a lot of other comic book movies or other movies, period. And that has to do with people who get resident status in a country. And I thought Krypton, the television series, actually went into it, though in passing. I thought it really said a lot. General Zod's statements about Superman. For those of you who are not immigrants who have gone into other countries and lived there, or even made those countries your newfound home, you may not identify with what General Zod is saying, but it has to do with identity. And General Zod, he basically said this about Superman, which was really consistent with what General Zod found out about Superman in Man of Steel. Basically, I'll just go through it. He says there are immigrants who turn their backs on their history and their culture. They passively accept the standards of their new world or their new country that their new world offers as though no others could possibly exist. He let himself be cut down to size. He was proud of it, proud of burying his heritage. Yes, we were enemies. Now, just to go elaborate on this a little bit, he's talking about the fact that Superman, he embraced the culture of Earth, and he knew very little about the culture of Krypton. When he started to find out the culture of Krypton, he had to choose between his Kryptonian heritage and between that and the people of Earth. He was forced to do that, but nonetheless he did. And he chose the people of Earth he grew up with instead of his Kryptonian heritage, which is why General Zod actually says he accepts the standards of their new world that the new world offers as though no others could possibly exist. And General Zod was talking about particularly where Superman only believed in the standards he would learn from his parents on Earth, that, destroying another civilization to keep your civilization going and existing and thriving and expanding was wrong. Now, it's interesting, though, that Superman shared that consistent belief system with another Kryptonian, which was actually Jor-El. So that when you really look at it and its essence, you'll realize that, in fact, Superman actually truly believed in what his father believed, his birth father, Jor-El. And in fact, what they're claiming, General Zod is claiming that he basically distanced himself from culturally, was not absolutely true. And anyway, he says that he let himself be cut down to size, the size of the Earth and their philosophy and their morality. And he was proud of it, proud of bearing his heritage. And again, he's not really truthfully being completely honest here. Superman embraced his heritage, which is why he even wore the suit that comes from the Kryptonian ship, and why he even kept the Kryptonian ship and the values and the standards that Jor-El was telling him about and his purpose. So he's not being completely honest here. But it's very interesting when you look at Man of Steel and you really flush out the story. You realize the General Zod, he could have tried to coexist, the Kryptonians coexist with Earthlings. Of course, it was going to be extremely difficult because people of Earth already viewed aliens in a certain way. But, and Jor-El tried to propose that argument to General Zod, and rightfully so, General Zod is quite correct in saying that they would struggle to exist on Earth, and there'd probably be a rift between the Earthlings and themselves. Of course, Jor-El believed very strongly that Superman was a bridge between two peoples, and he believed that Superman could bring that possibility of the unity between Kryptonians and Krypton and Earth. So Jor-El actually had a different belief system, but nonetheless, we see that General Zod he forces Kal-El into a predicament where Kal-El has to pick between the people of Earth and Krypton, because he's going to build Krypton over Earth. And so Superman, he does not agree with that, and this is the reason why General Zod says he rejected his heritage, he rejected his history, because for General Zod it was all or nothing thing. The survival of your race is what you have here, Kal-El. And it's very interesting that when we look at people who have immigrated to a new country, if you take, for instance, you go to the United States of America, a lot of people embrace the American values, they embrace the American standards, and then they turn around to the people of their own country, of their own nation, and they begin to pretty much bash them. I had to go to very recently to a Canadian visa application center with my mother. And the way that my fellow citizens of my country tried to treat my mother as she was trying to apply for a visa, kind of lorded over her, was really interesting. She, of course, stood up for herself, but at the end of the day, it was very interesting to see that when people, they have gotten a certain status and they are considered a certain way, how they mishandle other people and forget their own culture, their own history, their own background, that people from their own background are seeking now to do what they have done. I've even heard people speaking on the status of an individual in the United States of America, or the status of an individual in Trinidad and Tobago, which is my birth country. And it's interesting that some people who have legally got their status, and they now start to attack and become savage towards people who either did not do it through the legal route, or for some reason their status has expired, or they overstayed their visit, or whatever it is. And it's very interesting to see the people who have gained that status, how severe they can be on the people who, for some reason or the other, their status has been revoked or whatever. There's no compassion there. And you would think, as a countryman or a person who has come from a background and a culture similar to the culture that these other people who, for whatever reason, come shortchange, they would have empathy. They would have some understanding about that. No. They're actually harder on them. I look at racism as well, where some people, they gain favor with certain races, and they turn around and they bash the very races they come from. And it's just amazing to see that General Zod, in many respects, has a point to what he's saying. And it's kind of very poignant, what he's actually saying. Even though his perspective is kind of clouded and it's kind of messed up, he does have a valid point about Superman kind of rejecting his proposal, him being much more closely bonded to him on a genetic and a heritage and on a cultural level, and Superman more embracing the principles of humanity, which is alien to him. He's an alien to humanity. Now, while Superman sides on the positive side of this because General Zod's an extremist and General Zod did not really care about mankind at all, and also he had the option, a much more difficult option, but an option nonetheless, to try to seek to coexist as Superman is doing with Earth people, even though Earth people would more than likely sort of reject them and think of them as invaders anyway, and they would have to prove themselves, and it would be very difficult for them to acclimatize to Earth's environment, etc., etc., etc. He didn't pick that option. Now, again, in all fairness to General Zod, in all fairness to him, he does not see Earthlings as anything worth thinking about, right? And he is a military mind. He's genetically raised to think in military options. So I understand where he's coming from, but still at the same time, you have to understand. Think about the tables having turned, and it was Superman. It was some Earthling trying to seek refuge on Krypton, and Earth had been destroyed. You can see from General Zod's perspective how General Zod, if he was in that position to accept the Earthling amongst them, what he would do. He would probably have destroyed them. Think about the case where General Zod right now, Brainiac is coming to Krypton. Okay? Now Brainiac's coming to Krypton. Here's the funny thing about it. General Zod is all about killing Brainiac. Now I'm not saying he's wrong for doing that, and Brainiac's coming to invade and destroy Krypton, but Brainiac's basically doing the same thing General Zod was going to do to Earth. And how is it that it's all fair to defend yourself. I mean, if your race and your species is about to get annihilated, well, I understand. But it's almost to me a situation where, when you think about it again, there's all these things, these different angles to consider. When you think about it, right now, certain people, certain races of people feel they need to be pure, they need to keep their race pure, and the survival of their race means the extinction of other races, or at least the annihilation or the removal of other races from where they exist, which we call genocide, right? And when you think about it, the same attitude General Zod has, which is a nationalist sort of attitude, is the same sort of attitude these people, these so-called racists, actually have as well, or they call themselves nationalists. Okay, and I think about it more and more, how there's right now in the black diaspora and immigrants in the UK. They sent back a whole bunch of them. Some of them are in, their status is all over the place. And I'm thinking how current these issues are, and how much what General Zod is doing is actually happening in the world today as we speak. And there's more of a nationalist stand, and you're either for us or you're not with us. We don't want any foreigners here. No foreigners are accepted. And all of a sudden, the stranger, the Bible says, accept the stranger within your gates. The Bible talks about, defending the poor and helpless. But apparently, poor and helpless, it doesn't matter anymore. It's all about status. It's all about me and myself and nobody else. And I feel like in the world today, people pick sides only to get their advantage. There are a lot of vexes out of here, Darren vexes. They're spineless, and really and truly, they only basically want to benefit themselves in the world. And it's all about me, and it's not about anybody else. And whatever it takes for me to be a benefit, to get an edge for myself, that's what I'm doing. And that's the feeling I get. And it's interesting, the people who are clawing onto the past and they want the past to work, the people who are racist, or there are people who are, they try to oppress other franchises, and now they don't want it to happen. They don't want other people to come back, get a stronghold, and oppress them, because they have that fear, because that's how they live, so they think everyone lives like how they live. It's amazing how these people remind us of General Zod. And I'm just saying, it's just, to me, there was much more that David Goyer was writing in his script. I mean, he comments on religion as well, and God, the theocracy, and how sometimes hypocritical it is. And I understand all of that as well. But I'm just saying that I just find that these things are things worth discussing. So I just wanted to mention that for you guys before I just kind of highlight a couple other things I thought was very interesting that was there all along, and even in the Superman comics, but just some things that were brought more to light with Krypton and also with Man of Steel. So for people who don't know, in passing, if you go and watch Superman 1978, you'll actually see that implicit in that is, it also begins with Krypton, by the way. It's handled a little bit differently. But there is some focus on on guilds. Well, not really on guilds, but on houses, okay? And if you look here, you see the glyph of the different houses on the different characters. Of course, we all know the Superman symbol, but there were also other glyphs there. Now, why that's important, I think, and it wasn't really emphasized that much in any of the Superman movie series that Richard Donner did, but it's still something very important, was when you look at Man of Steel, for the first time, we actually realize Superman's an alien to this world, and also we understand the world that he lives in, like the different glyphs, and it was mentioned in passing, but Krypton really goes into it. And there's a difference between, of course, the glyphs for the different houses, and also what we call the different guilds. Now, if you're gilded, it means you belong to different schools of upbringing. What do I mean by that? You can either be in the school of law, or you could be in the school of science, or you could be in the school of martial arts and fighting. Okay, so they had different guilds. So you had the lawmakers guild, you had the scientific guild, you had the military guild, also known as the warrior guild. And that guild had a name. It's called Sagittari. Okay, so and then that's the symbol for it right there. Now, in Man of Steel, they actually also had different guilds, but of course the symbol's not the same. But the point is, this was the warrior guild. It means that you were genetically bred to be a warrior. And so these people, Sagittari, who were the best of warriors, they were bred genetically to be warriors. So the House of Zod, they were mostly warriors. Okay. And so we learned how that process takes place. You still have two parents. They donate. They donate. It's called binding. They donate their blood, and the binding, there's no marriage. It's just called binding. And by binding the combination, the genetic combination, they'd be able to tell you what they would be. Okay? And to some degree, we know that the Codex, which is the registry of citizens, which had all the genetic information from all the different people of Krypton, that would kind of hold and harbor the different genetic information there, which would bring forth the baby, the young, and that's how that happened. Now, that's a different thing to houses, okay? But what I wanted to point out here about Krypton, which I thought was very interesting, was that these different guilds were something that actually was there since Superman 1978, where you had the Council of Krypton, which is where all the lawmakers were. And that Jor-El, he was not a lawmaker, but he was also a science, but he was on that council. As Jor-El here, as Val-El here was on the Council of Krypton as well before it was disbanded, and he was also a formal scientist. In fact, in Man of Steel, Val-El, Jor-El's grandson, which is Jor-El, Val-El's grandson, which is Jor-El, was also on the Council of Krypton, and he was also one of Krypton's most foremost scientists, along with Laura Van. So I just find this very interesting, and I just wanted to point out that you had those things implicit in, they weren't explicitly expressed, but they were implicit in Superman 1978. So there was a consistency throughout, and I just wanted to share that with you guys. In a society